I care a lot about what people think, probably more so than I want to admit. It kills me to think that someone doesn't like me or doesn't accept me for who I am. I just fear disapproval. I try to blend in, I try to fit in, I try to just kind of be even-keeled and not too much in one direction because I don't want people to see me standing out and then criticize me or say, oh, I don't like that about her. When I see someone who looks like they have it all together, it kind of turns into a self-sabotage in my head. I turn the good things that they have going for them into bad things for myself. They look like things are going really well for them. They're pretty, their kids are cute and well-dressed. They have this or this that I don't feel like I have in that moment. And I totally forget about all the good things that I have in my life. I take for granted all those gifts from God, all those blessings. On those bad days when I'm feeling like I have nothing to offer and I don't measure up, it basically it paralyzes me. I have no motivation to go out and love people. I'm not the encourager that I'm meant to be. I don't have the joy that I'm supposed to have. And it's just a ripple effect. It affects every single part of my life. It affects my marriage because I don't feel confident to even tell my husband how I'm feeling. And then, I don't want my daughter to grow up and see me like this. I don't want her to listen to me go over all these things that are wrong with me when I want her to be strong. I want her to grow up confident and knowing she's loved and knowing who she is and that she's got so many things to offer. I think there's a lot of people that don't struggle with that. A lot of people are really confident, but this is mine. This is what I struggle with, is wanting acceptance and wanting everyone around me to be happy.
Most of you know Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 through 30 by heart now because we've read it at the beginning of every message. We believe that God has called us to find rest. He's offered it as this free gift. And over the last few weeks, we've been focusing on the lies we tell ourselves. Things that if I had this, then I could have rest. I just need to do more. I just need to achieve more. I just need... And this morning, we're going to deal with a lie that we tell ourselves that has nothing to do with what we have. It's not external at all. Most of the lies we've dealt with to this point have been about accomplishment, earning, having. And those are all outside of ourselves, things that we do. This morning, I want to talk to you about the lie that many of us have told ourselves. Man, I could really rest if I just need to be more. And I don't know what your more is. But I know that for most of us, what we see, what we wrestle with, isn't just what other people have, isn't just what other people have done or accomplished or how much money they're worth or the things they can do. We live in a culture that is constantly forcing us and challenging us to compare ourselves to one another. And so we've convinced ourselves, I could really rest if I could be like them, if I could look like them, if I could be more attractive, if I could be more in shape, if I could be more, I don't know what it is for you, but I know what they are for me. And like the young lady on the video we just watched, many of us are constantly comparing ourselves to this perfect, idealized version of ourselves that oftentimes has never existed and will never exist. Because we've allowed culture and outside pressures to tell us what we need to look like, how we need to be, and how we need to feel. This morning, I'm going to deal with a lie that I think a lot of us are dealing with. And I know that right away, most of the men in the room are going to feel like this is kind of a female issue. What I'm noticing with a lot of our young men in our church and a lot of the teenagers that I've dealt with in the past and even currently, it is affecting much more than just girls and how they view themselves and what they need to be and how they need to look and how they need to be perceived. I want to read to you Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, God's call, Jesus' invitation to come rest. And then I want to deal with this lie that we've set before ourselves. Jesus says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. In the context, he's talking about people who are working and trying to be more religious, and they're trying to do, they're trying to earn, they're trying to be something that they just couldn't be, and the law was never meant to satisfy. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And this is what all of us want. We want this rest for our souls, but we've dealt with these lies about, I can't wait until I have more stuff. I've got to enjoy and be invited into this rest now. Jesus doesn't say, hey, once you've got it all together, come enjoy this rest. His invitation is right now. You don't have it all together. You don't look the way you want to look. You don't have what you want to have. You're not doing the things you want to do. He says, come enjoy this rest, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart. Learn from me, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. And what Jesus is doing is he's contrasting. He's saying, my yoke is easy. Religion's law is never satisfied. My yoke is easy. Culture is never enough. And most of us know this, and yet we believe that if we really are going to enjoy rest, we've got to look a certain way, feel a certain way, be a certain way, be like them, be like the idealized, fully realized potential in us. My goal this morning is not to tell you to be lazy and not realize your full potential. My goal is for you not to worship an idealized or idolize a version of yourself that doesn't exist or no longer exists. My goal this morning is for us to have a healthy view of ourselves, of our bodies, fallen and broken in sin, in a culture that has idolized and worshiped our bodies, our being, ourselves. The Bible is very clear that God created us. He created us different from everything else on the planet. We have bodies, so does my dog, but we also have souls. And our soul and our body are this commingling. It's this togetherness. It's this oneness of our soul and our body. And this is why our soul needs our body and our body longs for our soul. And it's like a cake. When you take the ingredients, you mix them together, there's no unmixing them. Our body and our soul are united. But then death comes. This body of mine is dying. The soul of mine will spend forever either with God or eternally separated from God. And the Bible makes clear that when our physical body dies, our soul for a moment, like they're separated from the body, we're present with God. And then at Judgment Day, there's this reunification with a glorified body. So God isn't saying that our soul is what matters and our body doesn't matter. So don't come in this morning. I don't want you to leave here saying our bodies don't matter. No, God created our bodies. He created us, and He loves what He did. And so what I want you to have is a healthy view, a real healthy theology of the body. I don't want you to be compared to everything you see on a screen this week. I don't want you to be discouraged by how you no longer look like the pictures of yourself from 25 years ago, because we live in a fallen and broken world. And I know as I preach this message, I understand. I know that some of you are thinking, boy, that's easy for you to say, Mark. You're not dealing with the physical illness that I'm dealing with. I know that. Some of you are thinking, Pastor, that's easy for you to say. You haven't hit your 40s yet where your metabolism, hey, I'm in my late 30s and my metabolism is slowing down, so it's coming. Gravity has come for all of us. It is coming for all of us. The wrinkles on our foreheads are getting deeper. Like, it is happening, y'all. These bodies God created, they're good, but sin has entered the equation, and so they're breaking down. And so I don't want you to leave here this morning worshiping your body, but I also don't want you to leave here this morning dismissing what God made and how God made you. In a few minutes, we're going to read in Genesis. I'm not going to jump there yet. But God creates Adam and Eve, and everything goes back to Adam and Eve, and yet we all look completely different. God could have made us all look like Adam and all look like Eve, but I'm looking around this morning, none of us look like none of us. You know what I'm saying? We all look really different. And that is the beauty in diversity. God made it where we are incredibly different. Some of y'all are really tall and really thin, and we're all really jealous. Some of you, like me, you wish you were taller, right? Some of you are really big and really strong, like you've always just had broad shoulders and you can lift everything, and that's awesome. Some of you, you're not like that. Some of you, you've got attributes that are completely different and completely opposite. Some of your hair is curly, some of your hair is long, some of your hair is short. Some of y'all, like me, you're losing hair in places you want hair to be, and hair's growing where you don't want it to grow. Part of getting old. These bodies of ours, they turn on us. But the Bible says they were created. And before we read in Genesis, I want you to see what David said in Psalm 139. This is after the fall. This is David realizing that he's not the biggest. Remember, his brothers were bigger than him. He wasn't the biggest or the strongest or the most outgoing in his family. In his family, he was a runt. All his brothers were big, tall, and strong, and natural-born physical leaders. But in Psalm 139, David says this. He says, for you, he's talking to God, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. He's worshiping God and saying, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. This is the language I want you to believe about the way in which you were created. I know you have flaws, so did David. David had physical temptations that he gave into. David wasn't just physically flawed, like he had scars from battles. David had spiritual, moral breakdowns. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you. He's saying, God, you knew that I wouldn't be the biggest or the tallest. That wasn't important to you. When I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth, David is drawing this beautiful picture of how much attention to detail our Creator paints. And he cares deeply about the hairs on your head, deeply about the color of your eyes, deeply about you because he loves you, he created you. He says, your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them. God, before I even came into existence, you knew about this. The days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. God, before you created time, you knew about me. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. In other words, David's saying, all the things you've created, yet I know you have countless thoughts toward me. Now, I want you to think about this. Most of us, we spend our life full of thoughts. God spends his time full of thoughts about what he loves most. God created the mountains and he said they're good, they're beautiful. The sea, the creatures, the living creatures, the swimming creatures, the flying creatures, they're good. But he created man and woman and he breathed life into us, created us in his image, and his whole desire is to know us, to love us, to be with us. How vast is the sum of them? He says, how many thoughts you have for me? If I would count them, they are more than the sand. God, you're always thinking toward me. I awake and I'm still with you. How beautiful David's view of God, how he created him, how God views him, his being, his personality, his inner being, his outer being, his soul, his body. God has given David this gift of seeing himself how God sees him. And yet most of us, we do not see ourselves the way God sees us. We completely see ourselves in the opposite manner. We are comparing ourselves to the magazines, to culture. And here's what I want you to understand. Most of us at some point in human history have embodied beauty. Because at all throughout human history, beauty has changed. I was going to throw this up on the screen, but I didn't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. But you go back a few thousand years, they didn't have magazines, they didn't have Instagram, but what they did have was sculptures. And back then, physical beauty for a female was not like it is today. It was very different. And it depended on which culture and in which part of the world you existed. And today, we live in a world where it's completely changed. But you go back before that, hundreds of years, it changes all the time. And the point is, whoever's writing the books, whoever's writing the stories, whoever's filming the movie gets to determine what everyone sees. And what everyone sees, everyone interprets as, that must be beauty. And so whether it's sculptures in museums for thousands of years or films on a screen, we see things, we say, I'm not on that screen. I must need to be more like them. I must need to look like that. I must need to be like that. And we completely frown upon the beauty that God has given us, that God has created in us, our physical form, our soul, our personality, all of the things God has placed in us. We say, oh, I'm just a mess, I'm a wreck. And we internalize it. And we think of our bodies as being created for good looks. No, our bodies were created for good works. At some point in human history, yes, you would or would not have been the physical picture of beauty. So those who are in the room who are like, right now I am, great. Well, at some point you weren't, okay? And those who aren't, well, great, but at some point you were. Culture is constantly changing the narrative of what's beautiful, and this is why body dysmorphia has become a thing. And by the way, it's not just it relates to sexual, it's been happening for a long time. Heterosexuals, transsexuals, homosexuals, people have been changing the way they look and trying to fit a narrative, trying to form themselves, trying to be something they're not for a long, long time because we have not viewed ourselves the way God views us. wonderfully and beautifully created. And I'm just telling you, this is why I care deeply about our students and our kids at this church, because if we aren't careful and we just allow culture to tell our kids what they need to look like, culture to tell our kids what they need to act like, most of them won't fit the narrative and they will feel the pressure of, I don't fit in. I must need to change what I physically look like. I must need to change how I talk. I must need to change who I am. And David says, God, you formed me. You made me. David is reiterating the call of the garden in all of us. Genesis 1, verse 27, it says, so God created man in his own image. Okay? God did not do that with the whales. I love my pet dog. He didn't create the dogs in his image. Cats either. Cats are like way farther away than dogs. You know, dogs are closer. Cats are like way over there. None of them are created in God's image. But man and woman were. Male and female, he created them. And then in Genesis chapter 2, we see that he didn't just create man and woman in his image. He says this in Genesis 2, verse 21. He says, so the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man. And while he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed up its place with flesh. All this language here, it's talking about bodies. And the rib that the Lord God had taken from the man, he made into a woman and brought her to the man. And the man said, now, here's what we don't know. I love that God didn't tell us how old Eve looked. God created the earth, and when he created the earth, things were mature. Like he didn't plant the trees and like throw a seed in and be like, Adam, in a few years, this is going to be. He created it mature, okay? He created it fully life-giving. So the same is true of Adam, same is true of Eve. We don't know how old they were. They lived a long time, but we don't know. I think that's on purpose. Because too often we place too much emphasis on youth or age or beauty. We don't know what Eve looked like. No idea. Not a hint. We don't have her height. We don't have her dimensions. We don't have her eye color. We don't have her hair color. And that's on purpose. But when Adam saw her, he got overcome. He started singing, this is the bone of my bones. He's like, this is good. And flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So understand this. God creates our bodies. And before the fall, our bodies weren't just this thing that God had to use to encapsulate our soul or to entomb our soul. No, it was part of us. And God could have created our bodies as these functional robots that just march around, eat food, and yet God creates our bodies to enjoy each other, to enjoy food. Think about this. God could have created food where it was just like sustenance that we look for, and yet most of us, you got up this morning, I did. Where am I going for lunch today? Because we don't just get to eat. We don't just get to survive. We get to taste. We get to enjoy, and some of you are like, and I enjoy food the most. Of all of God's good creation, it ain't cats, it ain't dogs. It's food that God gave us that I enjoy, and I get it. God made our bodies to enjoy and to enjoy his presence. They became one flesh, and this is what I want you to notice, the next verse. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Don't skip on. Stay right there. That is the complete opposite of the world in which we live. Most of us have learned that there are just things we're ashamed of our body. I'm not even talking, yes, I want you to wear clothes to church. That's not my point at all. The best way I can illustrate this for you is when my son gets out of the bath. I want to put a towel, a diaper, his clothes on. He's like, I'm good. Let's go to the living room. The windows are wide open. Hey, neighbors. He doesn't care. No shame. None. And we know that's because he doesn't understand, but it's also because he doesn't care what he looks like, y'all. He genuinely doesn't. I'll say, Judah, where's your nose? He doesn't say, I don't like the way he'll put his finger on his, he doesn't complain about his nose being too big or too small, whereas most of you, when I brought up nose, you thought about your nose. I ask him, Judah, where's your belly button? He puts his finger on his belly button. He doesn't think, well, I wish I had an innie, or I'm so sad I have an outie, or I wish my belly weren't as big. I wish I was shaped a little. He doesn't think that. He just puts his finger on his belly button. I say, Judah, where are your feet? He grabs his feet. He doesn't say, oh, man, I wish I didn't have such big clown feet. Oh, man, I wish I didn't have such small feet. Oh, man, I wish my toes didn't look like. He doesn't think any of that. He has no shame. Our children are this beautiful embodiment of that pre-fall garden enjoyment, because my son enjoys food, y'all. He enjoys life. And this is what we were created to enjoy. And then, of course, sin enters the equation and everything changes. So much so. I want to read you what happened in 1 Samuel chapter 16. That same David, who later would say, God, you created me, you formed me, you shaped me. The Lord said to Samuel, Samuel came to see who God was going to select to be the king. And Samuel looks at David's brothers, and they're tall, and they're physically strong. Their shoulders are broad. And he says, these are the perfect physical specimens. And God says, none of them. God takes him over to David, who's small. He's got pimples on his face. He's got spots, he's so little. He says, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. He's talking here about one of David's older brothers. For the Lord sees not as man sees, but look on the outward appearance. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. There are things you cannot change about your body, about your physicality, about your personality, about you. And what I want you to understand is that God sees the inner part, the soul part, the part that he created with this free will, this desire, this choice to make to honor God or to dishonor God. Before King David, there was this King Saul, and he was tall. He was head and shoulders above everyone else. And when he was young, he loved the Lord. But then as soon as he got power, he rejected God, and God took the crown from him because his heart had changed. His physical stature hadn't changed. He was still as powerful as ever. But we live in a world where we look on the outward. The Bible says God looks at the inside. God sees what no one else sees. There are things about yourself that you can't change. And when we're young, we think of Christianity and our faith in active terms. The older I've gotten, I've begun to learn, and I was even doing some research this week on passive faith. And when we hear passive, the American in us says, we're not passive, we're active. Well, here's the thing. Our faith is both active and passive. What I mean by that, there's the active part of my faith. It's where I read God's word. I go to church. I practice the Sabbath. I enjoy rest. I turn everything off, and I enjoy God and his blessings. These are active things you do in your pursuit of God. But then there's the passive part of faith, the part you have no control over. The crisis that comes into your life, and you weren't looking for it, but God allowed it, and it actually is part of your spiritual maturity and your growth. And so you didn't have an active part in it. It just fell in your lap. It became something you were dealing with. It was a physical ailment on your body. It was something going on in your family. It was a breakdown in a relationship. It wasn't something you did. It was something that happened, something someone did to you. It was passive, but at the same time, it's a part of your faith, because now your faith is wrestling, and you're challenging, and you're dealing with whatever that is. And the older we get, in our 20s and our 30s, our faith is full of active features. Like, we go to church, we grow. But then as we get older, there are more passive scenarios in our faith. How are we going to deal with wayward children, with children who grow up in the church, who grow up knowing the Lord, but reject him and abandon the church, abandon God and faith? And what do we do with that? We didn't seek this out. What does this do to us? And so David or Saul, they've got these external things they have no control over, their physical bodies. They do have control over how they respond in their faith. And my hope is not that you walk out of here with a body positive image. Look, I want you to feel that's not the point of this. My hope is that you come to understand that God has created you, weird as you and I are, strange as we are. He's created us to use our bodies for good works. God has given you a mind. It might not be as sharp as someone else that you know. God has given you a personality. God has given you a physical form to use, to bless, to do good works. And there's nothing Satan would love more than to get you invested and involved in sin. But if he can't do that, he'd love to just discourage you and get you caught up and wrapped up in the thing God gave you instead of the things God has called you to do with the thing God gave you. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul uses specific language to talk about our bodies. 1 Corinthians 3, verse 16 says, Do you not know? Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you. Broken as your body is, and as many things as you'd love to change about your body, God dwells in you. Can I take a moment here? This week, Lewis came in. He did a lot of work to get the back a little more done under the stairs, some paint that needed to be finished. And when we got done on Thursday, we were cleaning everything up. I said, man, this just looks good, Lewis. I feel better about people coming in here because there's a part of me that when I see something wrong, I'm like, man, I don't want people to come in and look down on a problem or something that's broken. You know, I want it to look just right. The God of the universe looks at your body and all the flaws you think stick out, all the problems, all the mistakes, all the scars you bear. God dwells, His Spirit dwells in you. If anyone destroys God's temple, he says, this is why we take care of our bodies. God will destroy him, for God's temple is holy, and you are that temple. I don't want you to idolize the temple, but I also don't want you to dismiss the temple. Your body matters to God. Take care of it. Don't beat yourself up over 1 or 2 body fat percentage points. Okay, don't do that. But also don't destroy your body. Don't dismiss it. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4, in his next letter, he wrote one letter to the Corinthian church. They still had problems. He wrote another letter. So the good news is nobody gets it. We're all frustrating each other. It takes us a while to get it. He says, you know, I know you've been through a lot, but we don't lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away. Paul knows this body is wasting away. By the time he's written the second letter to the Corinthian church, he's physically exhausted. His body is failing him. Paul was sick, in prison. Prisons were awful back then, just like they're awful today, but man, it was even worse. And so he got sick a lot. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. And what Paul's doing is he's drawing a picture. The comparison to the outside world is we live in a world that is wrapped up in youth and beauty, and they're holding on to something that is dripping through their fingers. But we understand that these bodies are not all that we are. We have a soul. For this light momentary affliction, he says, the frustration right now that you have in this life, the issues, they were being persecuted, they were being frustrated, is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things, this should sound familiar, that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. I don't have time to read the whole chapter. Paul's going to go on in chapter 15 to lay out the entire case for our resurrected bodies. Because I don't have time this morning, I'm going to make you a promise. I'm going to write a little bit lengthy of a post this week, and I'm going to send it into the email of everybody who gets our church email about our glorified bodies. Our glorified bodies, we don't know a whole lot about, but we know a little bit because we're told that it will be from Jesus' body. It's going to be like Jesus' resurrected body. And here's what we know about Jesus' resurrected body. He physically ate. He spent time with his followers. Mary gave him a hug. He wasn't a ghost. Please don't believe that when we die and go to heaven, we're just angels floating around, spirits without bodies. We have resurrected bodies to look forward to. So I don't want you to walk out this morning thinking my body doesn't matter. My body's a loss. It's a total waste. I want you to understand that this light and momentary affliction should point us to the hope of this body's not all that we have. We have eternity to look forward to. We have a hope of a resurrected body. When Jesus was in his resurrected form, he would appear in rooms that were locked from the outside, and his disciples would recognize him. He bore scars. He showed Thomas the holes in his hand, the hole in his side. There are many mysteries about resurrection, about our after this life physical form, but we do know that God said there's food in heaven. Amen. Some of the good things in this life are going to pass to the next life. It's almost like God created our bodies to enjoy communion with us, fellowship with us, and for us to enjoy the good things God has created. And so we don't place all of our hope in how we look. And I hope you don't come to church this morning saying, Pastor, I don't have time for rest. I got to be more like them. I got to look more like this. I got to feel more. I hope you know that this morning, God sent his son Jesus to die on the cross in our place to forgive our sin so that we could look forward to a resurrected body and know that this body, it's going to fail us. Y'all, if you've been around any amount of time, you know that this body is failing you. Oh, Paul said, hey, physical exercise, it's worth little. He's saying it's worth a little, but he's like, it's little. It's not going to stop the march of time. It can extend your time here. And Paul says to take care of your body. Why? So that we can do more good works. We can be here longer to perform more good works in the community, in the church, to bless one another. But don't get it twisted. We won't live forever. So my invitation to you this morning is very simply this. Please don't allow a culture that is obsessed with looks to tell you that you need to be more like this. If I could just be this, I could have rest. You know, the people that you think you want to look like, they don't have rest either. Because they've got to maintain that thing that you and I feel like if we looked that way, if we were that way, if I was that funny, if I was that. See, everything else we've wrestled with has been external, but this one's internal. I'm going to confess to you something I did this week. I think sometimes when I'm preaching a message series like this, you can come to church and you can believe that pastor is preaching to us something that he must have realized totally before he would ever share this. No. Rest is hard. And one of the lies that I preach on a lot is one of the lies we talked about 2 weeks ago. Man, if I just had more, I could rest. And I believe that sometimes. Last week, you guys were really generous to me and my wife, and I'm just so grateful. Appreciate everything you gave us. And it's almost as if Satan knew where to tempt me and what to do to me. A few days later, I was thinking about a friend that I hadn't heard from in a while. And when I thought about it, I was like, I'll just go check their Instagram or Facebook or whatever it was. And when I did, I saw a link to a house they just bought. I didn't know they bought a house. And when I looked at the pictures, it rocked my world. For 2 days, after you guys blessed us with that gift, I'm looking forward to this sabbatical. I told my wife, I even on Tuesday night while she was at small group, I was walking Judah, and when I walked Judah by myself, I pray, and I was praying, and I told God, God, you're so good to us. And I said, Judah, God is just so good to us. He's been so good to us. But when I saw this house, my immediate thought was, how did they get this house? I will never tell you who. They're not even that bright. Don't judge me. Y'all do the same stuff. Y'all don't even. How did they afford it? How? I can't believe. And then suddenly the life I was so satisfied with, I was wrecked. I'm not keeping up. My house is not big enough. I wish I was exaggerating for a sermon. I'm not, y'all. For 2 hours, I began exhausting myself thinking what can I do to make more money? What can I do? I've got to catch up. I've got to close this gap. Their house is twice the size of our house. And I knew it was happening, and so I was like, this isn't right. But I was like, but no, they shouldn't have this, and I don't. For 2 full days, I was completely satisfied and thankful to God. And then one little thought and a link that I clicked, and everything was upside down. And you know the lie I was believing? Well, I got to have more. If I had more, then I could rest. But I need to go hard. I just need to make more money. 4 days later, I can tell you that's a lie. But in that moment, I believed it. Full throttle, all in, I'll just go hard for a few years, we'll save up. Don't need to do any of those things. Don't need to, don't have to. God's been very good to me. I say that to say this. You may be here this morning and your thing is not having more, it's being more. Pastor, you just don't understand. For years I've been trying to look this way. I get it. Look, I know all of us, if we were honest, look at pictures of ourselves from a few years ago and wish man, I wish I could go back to that size. I wish my face still looked that way. It ain't gonna happen. People are happy to accept your money, to give you a drug, a pill, a cream, and they count it all the way to the bank, and there comes a point where your rest is not dependent on how you look or how you're perceived or what you believe yourself to be. Your rest is an invitation from God this morning. So I'm just inviting you to respond this way. Is there anything too much for God to do? I don't think so. Is the hand of the Lord shortened? He said, no. We could ask God to do some things sometimes that we don't. We're like, we don't want to bother. And so this morning, I'm going to ask you to bother God with me and ask him. He's not actually bothered. But ask him to deliver us from this lie of, I need to look a certain way, I need to feel. And here's the thing, it's going to be hard because you're going to go right back into the world that is completely opposite of what I'm telling you. Your sons and daughters are going to have even more of it than you did. They're going to be told they need to look a certain way to feel good. They're going to be told they can't rest until their hips are this size or that size. And by the way, all of us have a part of our body that we're like, oh, I've never met anybody who's like, I love my nose, I love my hips, I love my height. Everybody wants to change themselves. Why? Because they've seen something. We've compared ourselves. So I'd like for you to ask God to deliver you from this lie that I need to be more like them. I need to be more filled. And some of y'all aren't comparing yourselves to other people. You're comparing yourselves to an idealized version of yourself. I am not saying this morning you need to quit dieting. I'm not saying this morning to give up your gym membership. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying have everything in its proper perspective. Take care of your body, but don't allow yourself to sacrifice rest on the altar of looking this way, of feeling this way, of being the best in the room. Understand this. God invites you to rest because these idols, their yoke is heavy. It's constantly saying more. It's never enough. You dropped 5 pounds, but what would you look like if you dropped 20? Oh man, you look so much better, but what if you dropped 2 more sizes? Oh man, yes, this is everything I always wanted, but if I had a little more, it would be even better. It's never enough. And so Jesus says that yoke you're carrying, it's too heavy. It's way too heavy. Take my yoke, it's light. But we keep saying, Jesus, not yet. Not yet. That's for heaven. He's like, it's for here too. Take my yoke. And so my invitation to you this morning is take his yoke. It's a lot easier. It's a lot lighter. And I'm telling you, you are going to be so much more pleasant to be around. You are going to be such a better spouse, such a better coworker, such a better human. It's almost like when we discover who God created us to be and what he's called us to do, not what culture says about us, and we live fully alive in what God has called us to be and do. The fruit of the Spirit grows. And boy, fruit just attracts everybody. Because fruit is sweet. It's good for the soul.